Hi, this is Miss Wise, and I thought I would record a lesson that we did today. This is December 1st, and what we talked about was inverse trig ratios and solving for angles. So the first thing is we're going to review for how do we solve for a missing side of a right triangle. Solve for a missing side of a right triangle. And it's always of a right triangle. So we have these trig ratios that we've talked a lot about already, where the sine of theta is equal to the opposite side length over the hypotenuse, and the cosine of theta is equal to the length of the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and the tangent of theta is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. So that we will refer back to a whole bunch. So to find the missing side, and what we've used so far is we use sine, cosine, and tangent. And what I'm talking about here is that if I have a right triangle, because it only works with a right triangle, and I'm given that the angle here is 20 degrees, and I'm given that this side length is 5, and I want to solve for my hypotenuse. I have a formula, and I am dealing with, so look at my angle. I circle it up, and I have the side opposite, and I'm looking for the hypotenuse. So going up here to my trig ratios, the trig ratio that relates to opposite and hypotenuse is sine. So I say sine of 20 degrees is equal to the length of my opposite side over my hypotenuse. So now I have an equation where I can solve for x. And how I do that is I multiply both sides by x. So it becomes x sine of 20 degrees is equal to 5, because to undo divide by x, I multiply by x. And then I need to divide by sine of 20 because I want to isolate the variable here. And when I plug this into my calculator, I just have 5 divided by sine of 20. And so that gives me my answer of 14.62. So x is equal to 14.62, whatever units my sides are in. Okay, so that reviews kind of solving for a missing side. So now I want to today talk about to solve for a missing angle. Missing angle, and this is again of a right triangle, and I am going to be given two sides. I'm going to use the inverse sine, or the inverse cosine, or the inverse tangent. And these can be found on your calculator, just like sine, cosine, and tangent was. If you look at your calculator and you see above the sine, it says sine -1. So to get there, you press second and then sine -1. Okay? So if I know the relationship of my sides, so let's say it's equal to 3 divided by 4. Okay? 3/4. My angle measure is 48.6 degrees, or 49 degrees. Now, you can use this anytime you're trying to solve for an angle measure. You use the inverse sine, inverse cosine, or inverse tan function. So let's do some work and we'll review that. So the first triangle we talked about today was triangle ABC, and I was given that side was 12, this side was 14, and I was asked to solve for the measure of angle C. Okay, so first thing I have to do is I'm going to circle up the angle I'm talking about. You do this every single time. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see what 12 and 14 are to angle C. So 12 is opposite to angle C, and 14 is the hypotenuse. And then I ask myself, which of the trig ratios relates opposite and hypotenuse? And you can look up on your paper that you took notes on, and I know it's sine. So sine of theta, or sine of C, in this case, I should put C, is equal to 12 over 14. That would be my equation. But that's not going to get me anything. 12 divided by 14 is just going to give me the ratio, which is 0.86. and I want to solve for the angle measure. So to solve for the angle measure, I do the inverse sine of 12 divided by 14. And you press second, inverse sine 12 divided by 14. And so my angle measure is 59 degrees. So the measure of angle C is equal to 59 degrees. Now, we can, every single time, it depends on what angle I'm talking about and what sides I'm given. So in the situation of this, where I have 18, 3, and this is angle, triangle EFG. Again, it's a right triangle because it only works with a right triangle. And I want you to solve for the measure of angle E. So what is the measure of angle E? Circle it up. To angle E, 18 is opposite and 3 is adjacent. So I have opposite and adjacent. That trig ratio is tangent. So the tangent of G is equal to opposite over adjacent. So it's equal to that ratio. But I didn't ask you what the tangent of G was. I asked you what the angle, not G, E, pardon me. I didn't ask you what G was, I asked you what E was. And so I need to find out what the angle measure E is. So I need to do the inverse because I'm looking for an angle measure. So I take my handy dandy calculator, inverse tan, 18 divided by 3, and that's equal to 81 degrees. So the measure of angle E is equal to 81 degrees. Now, the next ones that we talked about, we were given the 3 sides, and we were asked to solve for a given for an angle that we're asked for. So in this situation, it's L, M, and N, and I'm going to say this is 4, this is 3, and this is 5, and I'm going to ask you what the measure of angle L is. Measure of angle L. Well, I don't know what the measure of angle L is, but I do have some trig ratios that I can figure out. But I was like, which one do I use? I can use whichever one I want. I have all 3 of the sides. I just have to make sure that if I say sine, if I use inverse sine, that I use opposite over hypotenuse. So 4/5. Or if I do use cosine, that I do adjacent over hypotenuse. Or if I use tan, that I use opposite over adjacent. So if you plug these into your calculator, inverse sine, 4 divided by 5, 53 degrees. If I do inverse cosine of 3 divided by 5, 53 degrees. And then I do inverse tan of 4 divided by 3, 53 degrees. So it shouldn't have changed. It's always the exact same measure. Now, we do have a situation where you're told, okay, I have cosine of M is equal to 0.1234. And cosine of M, I want to solve for the measure of angle M. So to solve for an angle measure, I always use the inverse trig function. So I do second cosine 0.1234. And so that angle measure is equal to 83 degrees. Now, sometimes now I could have said, okay, I'm giving you the sine, cosine of M is 0.1234. Now find the tangent of M. Well, I just plug it into my calculator. Tangent, I know M is 83 degrees. Plug it in, and I'm given it's 0.1443. Okay, so all of the questions today can be used, these notes can be used to help you with the questions on page 21, which you were supposed to do.